Sometimes in life we have the rare opportunity to share in a once-in-a-lifetime event. Everything seems to go absolutely perfectly from the start to the finish. But then, not long after the fact, some news comes that not everything done in the event was up to snuff. And in fact, the news comes that some things were terribly wrong. And that is the case with the nation of Israel and the first campaign in the Promised Land when they took the city of Jericho. Sometime, or something I should say, was done terribly wrong. So on the surface, the Battle of Jericho was a triumphant campaign in the Promised Land. Triumphant campaign. But in reality, it was a tragic campaign in the Promised Land. And that led to a great tragedy in the next campaign to take a small village called Ai. The reason for the tragedy was unfaithfulness at Jericho by one and only one man. And we find the tragedy in the story told beginning in chapter 7 and verse 1. But the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully in regard to the things under the ban. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zadi, the son of Zerah, from the tribe of Judah, took some of the things under the ban. Therefore the anger of the Lord burned against the sons of Israel. Well, sin was in the camp of Israel. Sin by one man. This one man by the name of Achan had taken things from Jericho that were supposed to be melted down and put over into the treasury of the nation. But Achan coveted those things for himself, brought them into the holy camp of Israel there at Gilgal, and tainted the whole camp and all its people. Not knowing the sin that resided in the camp, Joshua proceeded with his strategy to take the village of Ai. Not knowing, Joshua orders this research that's going to lead to the tragedy by the spies sent to Ai. And so the Lord let Joshua do this, knowing it would lead to the tragedy in the battle. Verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven, east of Bethel, and said to them, Go up and spy out the land. So the men went up and spied out Ai. And they returned to Joshua and said, Do not let all the people go up. Only about 2,000 or 3,000 men need to go up to Ai. Do not make all the people toil up there, for they are few. We could have accepted Joshua in his attempt to send these spies to inspect the next target, because he had learned that 40 years before when he was under the command of Moses, and Moses sent him as a spy to check out the Promised Land 40 years before. It had worked at Jericho also. Why wouldn't it work now at Ai? And so the spies saw the little village and the meager means of that village, and not many men would be needed to take the target. So 2,000 or 3,000 would do, they said. That would be enough. And surely 600,000 would be an overkill. But it did not matter, I'm telling you, how many men were taken. Israel was going to lose against Ai. So Joshua trusted the spies. After all, why should he not? The Lord allowed Joshua to lead the campaign on his own without the Lord's help. We come to the result of this tragic campaign with the defeat at Ai of the Israelites in verse 4. So about 3,000 men from the people went up there, but they fled from the men of Ai. The men of Ai struck down about 36 of their men and pursued them down the gate as far as Shimberi, and struck them down on the descent. So the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Ai had the upper hand. Israel did not get through the gate. Israel had to retreat. 36 men were killed right off the bat there at Ai. In Israel's retreat, more were killed at a place called Shebarim. The name Shebarim means broken to pieces. It was where Joshua and the nation were broken into pieces. It was where Israel turned their hearts to melt like water. The results of the tragedy led to the remorse of the tragedy, especially with Joshua mourning over what had happened at Ai in verse 6. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, both he and the elders of Israel. And they put dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord, why did you ever bring this people over the Jordan, only to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? If only we had been willing to dwell beyond the Jordan. Lord, what can I say since Israel has turned their back before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it, and they will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great nation? What a question. Joshua felt like the entire reputation of the nation of Israel was lost there at Ai in that Amorite village. It was the reputation that was built by Moses, and when he led that nation across the Red Sea, and as that was the testimony that Rahab had given over them in Jericho. They were a fierce nation, and the Lord was with them. Now, all the nations that were afraid of Israel were no longer going to be afraid of them, because this little village of the Amorites defeated the great nation that was supposedly selected by the Lord to be His. And as we will see at this point in the story, Joshua and his men did not stay at that temporary camp outside Ai. They had returned to Gilgal, about 15 miles away. However, to get there, it's not 15 miles. Here's a quick thing. Here's the Jericho. Here's the Jordan River. Here's the Dead Sea. There's Jericho. There's Gilgal. From Gilgal over to Ai, it's about 15 miles. But you see this mountain range? That's a problem. They had to go around the mountain range and through a pass, which made it about 35 miles. It was not a quick journey. In fact, it may have not been a one-day journey. And so they returned to Gilgal. Now, back in Gilgal, the Lord did not let Joshua mourn very long. In fact, it was time for the revelation of the tragedy and the sin that was in the camp in verse 7. So the Lord said to Joshua, Rise up. Why is it that you have fallen on your feet? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. And they have even taken some of the things under the ban, and have both stolen and deceived. Moreover, they have also put them among their own things. Therefore, the sons of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. They turn their backs before their enemies, for they have become accursed. I will not be with you any more unless you destroy the things under the ban from your midst. Rise up, consecrate the people, and say, Consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, for thus the Lord, the God of Israel, He said, There are things under the ban in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you have removed the things under the ban from your midst. Well, the Lord had promised that He would not help the nation if it and all its people continued to break the covenant. The ban was given through Moses just a few months before on the other side of the Jordan River, and it was found over the pages of Deuteronomy. And Joshua had warned them of the ban just before they started this march on Jericho. Well, the Lord spoke to Joshua and gave him the instructions for the remedy of the tragedy if Joshua would punish the sinner. In the morning, then you shall come near by your tribes. And it shall be that the tribe which the Lord takes by lot shall come near by families. And the family which the Lord takes shall come near by households. And the households which the Lord takes shall come near by man. By man. It shall be that the one who is taken with the things under the ban shall be burned with fire, he and all that belongs to him, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has committed a disgraceful thing in Israel. So lots were cast when the 12 tribes came by. And in the miraculous direction of the Lord, the guilty tribe was selected. The tribe was selected. Then the family was selected. Then the household was selected. And then the man by man was selected. And it seems that, I've never seen this in any of the commentaries, but I believe probably the priest was using the Urim and the Thummim to help out Joshua, because if a question could be answered, the glow of the jewels on the Urim and the Thummim would answer the question. And if that be the case, they asked the question and they kept going by. And each one went by, his lot was cast. And if the question was asked, and if the question came up that that was the person or that was the tribe, the Urim and the Thummim glowed. That is probably what I think had happened. I really do think that's the way it is. Although I have not... but why have the Urim and the Thummim to answer those type of questions, which we know it did, if it wasn't going to do that one? In whatever way, the lots were cast, rather by the Urim and Thummim or by casting die or whatever, and the revelation was discerned, and Joshua finds the thief. We see what Joshua does to find the thief in verse 16. So Joshua arose early in the morning and brought Israel near the tribes, and the tribes of Judah was taken. And he brought the family of Judah near, and the family of Zerahites. And he brought the family of the Zerahites near the man by man, and Zabdi was taken. The process selected the tribe of Judah, and the family of the Zerahites, and the family of Zabdi. And with the family of Zabdi, Joshua is looking at all the men belonging to Zabdi. And a lot is cast, and we see who Joshua finds. He brought his household near, man by man, and Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, from the tribe of Judah, was taken. So the man who caused the sin in the camp was one man, Achan. The name Achan in Hebrew means troubler. And so the Lord knew Achan would be the troubler of Israel and caused him to have that name from birth. The troubler caused more than 36 men to die. More than 36. And Joshua was stern with Achan. And here is what Joshua says in verse 19. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, I implore you, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and give praise to Him. And tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me." So Joshua feels for this troubler. He begs for the truth. Only the truth will set Israel free from the trouble of this man that has come upon the nation. Why did Joshua call Achan my son? Well, he did so with a genuine and a sincere parental care and regard. Joshua reached out to Achan as if he was his son. But every father knows that every son must be punished for evil deeds. So from that, Achan speaks, and we hear what Joshua hears in verse 20. So Achan answered Joshua and said, "Truly I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. And it is what I did. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful mantle from Shinar, and 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold 50 shekels in weight, then I coveted them, and took them, and behold, they are concealed in the earth inside my tent, with the silver underneath it." Achan confessed his sin. The troubler had sinned in two ways. First, there was the mantle from Shinar that he had coveted, and he took it. Now, the mantle was a beautiful shawl from Babylon, would be with stitching on it of pictures, such as animals or men or whatever. Sometimes they're woven into the fabric, sometimes they're embroidered into the fabric with a needle. Most of the times, these shawls had pictures of Babylonian deities on them. Oh, they were beautiful, but they were still Babylonian deities, in other words, idols and false gods. And it is for that reason it was banned. It would tempt Achan as long as it was in his possession, to wonder about that idol that was pictured on that shawl one day, or maybe even his kids. So according to Moses' instruction concerning the battles in all the cities and villages of the Canaanites to be taken in the promised land, the shawl would have been burned. Deuteronomy tells us that. Moses said, "Then you shall gather all its booty into the middle of its open square, and burn the city and all its booty with fire as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. And it shall be a ruin forever. It shall never be rebuilt. Nothing from that which is put under the ban shall cling to your hand, in order that the Lord may turn from his burning anger and show mercy to you, and have compassion on you, and make you increase, just as he has sworn to your fathers." Well, that was Achan's first sin. Achan's second sin was the taking of the silver and the gold. Had Achan collected the silver and gold and came and deposited into the treasury of Israel, which other men were doing, that would have all been fine. But that is what the rest of the men did. It was not what Achan did. He did not do that. He took it for himself. It belonged to the Lord and the treasury of Israel. And Achan wanted it to belong to himself. And he hid it in his tent, in the dirt. Now you might wonder why Achan says the items are stored with the silver underneath. Achan had probably wrapped the 1 bar of gold in the shawl. And once the hole was dug, he put the 200 shekels in the hole first, kind of making a bed. And then he carefully laid the shawl with the gold on top of the shekels, and then covered it with the dirt. We have to wonder what he did with the extra dirt. Because he dug a hole and put stuff in there, there was extra dirt. So Joshua heard Achan's confession. Now we see what Joshua instructed in verse 22. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and behold, it was concealed in his tent with the silver underneath. Just as Achan had reported, the men found in the dirt, in his tent, the shawl with the bar of gold resting on that bed of silver shekels. So we see next what Joshua retrieved, verse 23. They took them from inside the tent and brought them to Joshua and to all the sons of Israel, and they poured them out before the Lord. Now the band, shawl, and the gold and silver laid at the feet of Joshua as they were poured out before the Lord. In verse 6 of this chapter, the writer tells us that Joshua was in front of the Ark of the Covenant where he was mourning and all this was happening. And more likely, it was still covered with that blue tarp as required for traveling, because this ark is going where they're going. It was taken around Jericho in that way for 7 days. We do not know if it was actually carried over to that disastrous battle of Ai, but surely it was not actually in the battle. It may have been a distance away. But being just a small campaign, the ark was probably left back in the camp of Israel in Gilgal. And from Gilgal to Ai, as I told you, is about 15 miles as the crow flies. But they would have to go over the mountain range. And so that was not the way they would have gone. They would have gone through the pass and come around, which made it about 35 miles. Achan did not carry the stolen band items out of his tent to Ai. Remember, they were stolen from Jericho, and he put them in the camp there at Gilgal, where their main camp was, and when they left the family to go take the city of Ai. How much worse would it have been made, his sin be made, if he was not at the battle of Ai? You see, we don't even know if Achan was one of the 3,000 that were chosen. He might have been still home at the camp in Gilgal when they came back totally defeated. How much worse would it have been for Achan and his sin if he wasn't even in the battle and he was there with his idols and the idol, that shawl with the idols on it and the gold and the silver in his tent, when those lives were lost because of him? It was bad. Joshua had no choice. Achan had sinned greatly, and his sin led to the deaths of many men. Joshua has to punish this thief. So we see where Joshua went here in verse 24. Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, the son of Zerah, the silver, the mantle, the bar of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and all that belonged to him, and they brought them up to the valley of Achor. The writer does not tell us, but a map helps us understand where Joshua went. Joshua's about 15 miles away from Ai. He is just outside the camp of Israel in Gilgal. The valley where they're going to be is just up north of Jericho and up north of Gilgal, and where Joshua takes Achan. And all the banned items, as well as Achan's family, his tents, his belongings, everything that belongs to him in any way, they take up there to this valley. And although the writer tells us that the name of the valley is Achor, it is not the name at the time they go to this valley. Joshua will arrive with Achan. And after Israel completes the punishment of Achan in the valley, the nation will name that valley Achor. Achor means trouble. Achan means troubler, the troubler of the trouble. In the valley, we hear what Joshua said. Verse 25. Joshua said, "Why have you troubled us? The Lord will trouble you this day." Well, Joshua asked the question of Achan, but he did not expect an answer, nor, according to the writer, did he allow Achan to answer. Why have you troubled us? If Joshua had called him by name at the end of that sentence, he would have said, "Why have you troubled us, you troubler?" But the writer does not tell us that. But he might as well, because that is the context of the Hebrew word picture spoken here by Joshua. The Lord was about to trouble the troubler, and Joshua knew the penalty was death by stoning and then by fire, and the law made that clear. We come now to what Joshua ordered. And all Israel stoned them with stones, and they burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. And they raised over him a great heap of stones that stands to this day, and the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Why was Achan stoned? The answer is found in Leviticus. It falls under the instruction to stone the one who curses and blasphemes the name of the Lord. Here is that passage. "If a man takes the life of any being, he shall surely be put to death. The one who takes the life of an animal shall surely make it good, life for life. If a man injures his neighbor, just as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, just as he has injured a man, so it shall be inflicted on him. Thus the one who kills an animal shall make it good, but the one who kills a man shall be put to death. There shall be one standard for you. It shall be for the stranger as well as for the native. For I am the Lord your God." Then Moses spoke to the sons of Israel, and they brought the one who had cursed outside the camp and stoned him with stones. And thus the sons of Israel did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Achan had not cursed, but he had injured his neighbors by his theft. More than 36 had died. And with what happened to his neighbors, so it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The one who kills a man shall be put to death. How did they put the person to death in the Levitical passage? It was by stoning. It was to apply to Achan also. So we come that Achan was stoned and then he was burned. But we also come to a quandary here with Achan. All of his family members were stoned with him. And the quandary comes from Moses' summary of the law in Deuteronomy. And it says this: "Fathers shall not be put to death for their sons, nor shall sons be put to death for their fathers. Every one shall be put to death for his own sins." That's in Deuteronomy 24:16. So why then were Achan's family members stoned to death also? For the sin of their father. Did that not break the law to stone them as for Achan's sin? The quandary can actually have been settled when you realize that Achan's family lived inside the tent. And all Achan's family had that would have been inside the tent, would have known that something was buried in that dirt. And they probably knew about that. And how could have he had covered it up and hid it from them? The family had a little space in the tent, save for the few articles of clothing they would have, and their mats for sleeping. They knew, in other words. So they were still guilty too. And to prove that they knew, we only need to look at the response of the Lord when Achan's family and the possessions were burned in the great heap. In verse 26a says, "And the Lord turned his fierceness of his anger." Translation, the Lord approved of the punishment, all of it. Then the writer tells us that Joshua proclaimed what he proclaimed by the words trouble and troubler in respect to Achan and the valley in verse 26b. He says, "Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day." The name that name stuck with the place. In the future, the prophets Hosea and the prophets Isaiah will still call it Achor. It is but 12 miles from Jerusalem. 12 miles from Jerusalem. But it will later prove to be Achan's Achor. That is to say, it is later to be proved to actually be for Israel the troubler's trouble. And that story that we have there will have to wait for another day. The deal about this is, one person inside of one church, in one Sunday school class, in one town, in one community, can sin against the Lord when all the community is supposed to be under the covenant and obeying the covenant. And the Lord will cause trouble on that entire community because of the sin of one person. Think about that.